5, an event put on by the Funding Our Future campaign. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Shia Cabas, and I'm the Director of Economic Policy at the Bipartisan Policy Center. In 2016, BPC released a comprehensive report on retirement security and personal savings from a bipartisan commission led by former Senator Kent Conrad and Jim Lockhart, a senior official in the Bush administration. While some of those recommendations have been drafted into legislation, we came to realize that there was an underlying challenge, namely that retirement security as an issue is not getting the attention it deserves. We know that far too many Americans have little or no emergency savings. We know that far too many Americans do not have access to retirement savings at their place of work. We know that far too many Americans are at risk of running out of money in retirement. And we know that Social Security's trust funds are only about 15 years away from running dry. Yet we haven't had any major retirement legislation passed since 2006, and the last Social Security reform took place before many of us in this room were even born. As the baby boomers move into retirement and millennials enter the workforce, with far more student debt than any previous generation, it's clear that we need to elevate this issue to a national priority. That's why we have joined with 30 partner organizations to form the Funding Our Future campaign. The campaign is about informing the public and policymakers about America's retirement security challenges and showing that there are viable solutions out there. We have three main pillars. 1, making it easier for Americans to save at all ages. 2, helping Americans transform their nest eggs into retirement income. And 3, saving Social Security to ensure that it remains the bedrock of retirement security. As you'll see today, we are trying to spread the message by personalizing the issues, specifically by helping people think more about their own retirement planning, while at the same time understanding the public policy that affects their options and ultimately their outcomes. The sessions that we have lined up today should provide a healthy dose of both. I'm especially excited to be here because of the momentum that this campaign and today's event in particular represents. Getting 30 diverse organizations to agree on even something as simple as lunch food isn't easy. So this coalition is a real testament to the powerful issue of retirement security, bringing folks together in a call for action. Now, don't get me wrong, our partners have a variety of opinions on what ought to be done. But the fact that we are all here together calling attention to the challenges sends a powerful message. We at the Bipartisan Policy Center are merely the hub of the conspiracy. This campaign is a truly organic partnership, one that is driven by the missions of its partners to improve the retirement security prospects of millions of Americans around the country. In particular, our educational partners provide the rigorous analytical basis for the campaign, and our executive partners, Edelman Financial Services, TD Ameritrade, and the Charles Schwab Foundation, along with our corporate and associate partners, provide additional expertise and the financial resources to make this campaign a reality. You can find these partners listed on the one-pager at the front and on the campaign's website at www.fundingourfuture.us. I want to thank all of these partners for their contributions and dedication to this effort. I also want to thank our team at the Bipartisan Policy Center who has put in so much work over the last couple of weeks to make today possible. Tim Shaw, Cody Carmody, Dora Engel, Jack Rometta, Carolyn Cooper, they're all around here in the room, and they really helped to make today a success. A couple of housekeeping notes. First, you can find the relevant materials from many of our partner organizations on the table at the front of the room when you walked in. Second, we'll be live tweeting today's event at the hashtag #FundingOurFuture, so I'd encourage you to join the conversation. My hope is that at least some of you are not just here for the box lunches, but rather that you recognize the importance of getting started early when it comes to planning your financial future and understanding how that planning is impacted by public policy. And that's what our terrific lineup of experts is here to help you with today. So let's get started. Mary Beth Franklin is a contributing editor at Investment News and a nationally recognized expert and author on many retirement security issues. She writes regularly about the latest research and thought leadership on retirement income planning, and also spent years covering Capitol Hill. So she has the perfect combination of expertise for today's event. We're excited to have her wealth of experience with us in leading our first session. The campaign overall is called Funding Our Future to reflect the fact that when it comes to the retirement security of our society, we're all in this together. But there's unquestionably a personal component to this conversation, which is why we've titled this first session, Funding Your Future, the Building Blocks of Financial Security. So I'm going to invite Mary Beth up here to get us started.
What a great introduction. And it says push to talk. I think that's still green. Can you hear me? Yes? Push again. How's that? Yes, no? We'll go here. Okay. Yes, thank you, Shai, for the great introduction. And I am going to be joined here by Jamie Hopkins, who is the guru of all things financial planning. He's with the American College of Financial Planning and is very instrumental in the curriculum for the Certified Financial Planning Program and other designations. So he created for all of you a fascinating quiz. And I'm going to ask Jamie, push hard, I think, because I did the same thing. Do we have a red button here? We're good? That he created a specialized quiz for all of you here, and I think it's a good news, bad news story. Jamie, tell us a little bit about why you created this type of quiz and what were the top line results.
Yeah, so thank you everyone for having me here today, and thanks for joining, and hopefully besides just for lunch, that's good to start. But yeah, so when we were talking about me coming here and what I should do, a lot of my research, I look at financial literacy, retirement income literacy rates across the country, and I wrote a book on that too, but I thought, well, that's a fun thing. People like taking online quizzes too. They just, find out which Game of Thrones character you are, how much you know about your own financial planning. And so we really did create this, hopefully for the group that's here. And as Mary Beth said, it's kind of good news, bad news. The good news is the group that took this here, we had 120 respondents, and I think that's probably about how many people we have in the room right now. But so you're slightly kind of more literate than the average American, so that's good. The downside is there's still a lot of things the group didn't know. Average score about a 75%, which is a C, so if you were in college, you probably wouldn't be super psyched with that. Kind of still a passing score, but about half of the respondents were below a 70 and about half the respondents were above. And then we really saw kind of general financial literacy, understanding inflation, that the group did very well on. Then when we actually asked kind of some specifics about Roth tax treatment and the federal thrift savings plan, actually kind of surprisingly poor results there. How many people in the room are in the federal thrift savings plan?
Raise high, because if you are, you're very lucky.
It's a good plan, and it does seem like a lot of you might not know exactly how it works for you. So that's kind of the downside.
Talk about that for a second, because the TSP, as you know, the Thrift Savings Plan available to all federal employees, is actually the largest 401k equivalent in the world. It also has some great investment choices at incredibly low rates.
Yeah, the fees in there are incredibly low.
Right. And the amazing part of it is the match. And that's the part where you didn't do so well. So Jamie, talk about how does somebody in this room max out their TSP contribution?
Yeah, so the government does put in kind of 1% for everyone, whether or not you participate. Now, that's not a whole lot. That's not going to get you to a secure retirement, right, saving 1%. So the encouragement there is with a match. And what we asked, I believe, was 3%. You get the maximum employer government match there. And we had 63% of respondents actually say, yes, that was the correct answer. Well, that's wrong. It's actually 5%. So the first 3% get matched dollar for dollar, 100%. And then the next 2% gets a 50% match. So to get the full kind of 4% government match, you need to contribute 5% of your kind of basic pay is really how it's defined. And that'll get you in there at 10%. So they'll be putting in 1, you put in 5, you get a 4 match, that's 10%. That's actually not so bad. If you start early, right, you're in your early 20s, that's a decent start. Now, it might not be quite to the level we want it at, but it's a good start for saving.
Well, let's put this in perspective. General theory these days is, what do you need to save for retirement? It's roughly 15% of your gross income from the very beginning. And most of you would go, 15%? I've got student loans, I've got bills, I've got rent. How do I do this? Well, think of it this way. That's the total. If you were in the TSP and managed to put in 5%, and the government essentially matches and contributes the other 5%, that's 10% off the top. you're 2/3 of the way there. And even better, if you put in 5 and you're getting 5 from the government, you have gotten 100% return on your money before you invested a dime. As a certified financial planner, I can't guarantee that anyplace else. That's pretty impressive. Now, I'm usually on the Hill at least once a year during, saving for retirement week, speaking to young Hill staffers. And I do give them the same spiel saying, boy, you are so fortunate to be in the TSP. And if you are probably defaulted at 3%. Well, guess what? If you stay at 3%, even with that government match, your retirement's going to look a whole lot like college. And do you know why? You're going to be eating a lot of ramen noodles. And when someone asks you for your ID, it's not going to be to get into a bar. It's going to be for your Walgreens senior discount. And you're not going to be as cute. So really take advantage of time on your side. This is the time. And the other key part is we always talk about pay yourself first. That's the advantage of having money coming directly out of your paycheck before you get your hot little hands on it and it goes into your long-term savings. If you take the other approach of, I'll pay my bills first, I'll be responsible, I'll pay my student loans, I'll pay my credit card debt, and then I'll save, chances are you're not going to have anything left to save. So do take advantage of that automatic enrollment. Don't stop at the 3%. Maybe you can't do more initially, but every time you get a raise, bump up a little bit more. Your future self will thank you. Now, we talked about the Roth IRA. There's also a bit of a
misconception
there. So let's talk about why that's important.
Yeah, so how many people here use a Roth IRA in their savings? I'll do another hand, and not the thrift savings, but a true Roth IRA. So Roth IRAs offer a really important aspect here, which we kind of term as tax diversification. So most likely, right, the people in this room, a lot of Americans will have tax deferred savings. So that's your traditional salary deferral 401k. Now, like diversifying investments or anywhere else in life, it's helpful to diversify among taxes because, as you saw this last year, we don't exactly know where taxes are going to be each and every year. We have the Tax Cut and Job Act, brings taxes down. Well, that's actually a good time then to consider using Roth savings. If you're in a temporarily lower tax bracket, it's a good time to pay taxes now and then defer essentially all that growth out into the future. You'll receive tax-free in the end. Now, if your tax rate's very high, it's a good time to do tax deferral, right? Not pay taxes today and defer that out into the future. In retirement, most Americans are going to be in a lower tax rate. But we don't know that for sure. So the benefit is have some after-tax money, have some Roth tax treatment, and then have some tax deferral. It spreads out the risk of changing tax rates over time. And I don't think anyone in this room would expect that tax rates are going to be exactly the same today as they are in 60 years when you're retired, right?
And the other point, we have a new tax law that took effect this year, and that it expires in 2026. And some people would argue we may be in the lowest tax rate we may ever see. This may be a great time to contribute to a Roth where you get no upfront tax deduction and let all that future growth come out in the future tax-free.
Or even doing something called Roth conversion. So you're actually taking traditional money over the next couple years and converting it over. Now, another really interesting thing about the Roth aspect we want to bring up, that this is very valuable for young savers. Generally speaking, early in your career, you're going to be making less money than hopefully you are later on. So you're in a lower tax rate. So that's also a good avenue for Roth. Now, another thing, the question that people actually got wrong here was talking about your own Roth IRA contributions. This is actually an encouragement for young savers to put money in and still have access to funds in case something else goes wrong. You can withdraw your own contributions to a Roth IRA really at any time without penalty tax or really negative tax implications. That's incredibly different than the IRA, the 401k. Typically, if you try to pull your own money out of tax-deferred accounts, you're not only going to pay ordinary income tax on it, but you're going to get hit with a 10% penalty tax. So there is a real benefit for young savers that don't have a lot of emergency funds to save in a Roth, to get that tax advantage growth in there, but still have some access to your own funds. Now, obviously, we want to try to keep that in there for retirement as much as possible, but for young savers, that's a reality that we might have healthcare expenses, buying a house. There's a lot of things that could come up where we might need some access.
And also, that's a great point about that escape hatch. We talked about there is a Roth component to the TSP, and it's a little bit different than a Roth IRA when it comes to the escape hatch. What's one of the big differences?
Yeah, one of the big differences is going to be your access to that, this pro-rata nature. The ability to pull out just your contributions first is a lot harder if you're in a 401 or federal thrift savings plan. So the Roth IRA really does provide more access to your funds than the other types of savings. So that is something to consider, doing that on top of your federal thrift savings plan, not in lieu of it. We still want to make sure we get that match and all of that aspect.
Well, here's the bonus round for you. Jamie is one of the top personal finance experts in the country. He's
Very
open
nice.
to your questions. Does anybody have questions, whether generic or specific to your situation, that Jamie can answer? Don't be shy. This would cost you $300 an hour anyplace else. All right, I don't see a hand, so let's talk. Going once, going twice? Let's talk a little bit more of how the personal part of this might fit into the bigger future retirement income. This is one leg of the old three-legged stool, right?
Yeah, and so we used to talk about this three-legged stool, right? Your company, your personal, and then the government aspect. And over time, one of the things that's happened is, right, we've actually shifted more responsibility onto the individual, right? Away from pension plans, maybe some reduced government. And so that ability to understand what you need to be doing, understand your current benefits, understand the current tax system to take advantage of it is really more important today than it's ever been before. I also think it's worth making note of, since we're here and talking about this, and Social Security is one of the big pieces, and Mary Beth is really one of the leading experts in that area. Social Security has to get reinvigorated for young individuals. It has to happen. I am too often in rooms where I ask young individuals, do you think Social Security is going to be there for you? And most of the room now has resigned themselves to the idea that it won't be there, right? That's a really upsetting thought, because it will become a self-fulfilling prophecy if young people, millennials, young workers say, well, it's not going to be there for me. Then we stop caring about it as an issue, and that really needs to flip. We need to care about it. We need to care that we've paid into it. We need to care that 2/3 of 21 to 32-year-olds have nothing saved for retirement, which goes back to one of the first comments. This room's not representative of America in the true sense of earnings and savings, right? Now, we might represent America here, but we have vastly different saving opportunities than most of America. We're small employees, don't have employer plans in place that are matching, putting in 5%. That's not the normal, right? You have a very great plan and opportunity here.
Right. All the research shows that when people have access to a retirement plan at work, they are more likely to save. Unfortunately, so many people work for small businesses. It's actually the big engine of the economy, and they're the ones who are least likely to have access to a retirement plan. But there is some legislation kicking around that would change that. Let me give you a little bit of hope, though. We're not all doom and gloom here. You've got decades to go before retirement, and your retirement's going to look a whole lot different than mine. I'm a lot closer to it. And we talked about that three-legged stool: personal savings, pensions, and Social Security. Social Security will be there for you. It may look a little bit different. You will have to rely on your personal savings, but something's going to be different. You are probably going to take advantage of the gig economy in retirement. You may be driving for Uber or Lyft at 65, and that's pretty cool. Your wife or husband may want to get you out of the house, and you may want to like the extra money. Guess what? The fastest growing group of Airbnb hosts are single women over the age of 60. They love to entertain, they've got a guest room, they like the extra money. Americans are very good at figuring out solutions. Your solution may be different than ours, but the bottom line is Social Security will continue to be a critical part of your retirement future, and you need to get behind it and demand that it's there for you. And you also need to take that personal responsibility of saving for your own future. Your future self will thank you. So Jamie, I want to thank you for your insights, for the quiz, and all of you for attending the first of what I hope will be many very interesting panels. And congratulations for taking the first step of securing your own future.
Thank
Shai,
you very
will
much for
take it
having
away?
us.
Thanks. Oh, yeah, sure. Yep. Thanks, Mary Beth and Jamie. That was a great overview of some of the important decisions that young professionals need to be thinking about when it comes to their retirement security. We're now going to shift gears a bit and get a status update on the two largest federal programs that impact retirement security, Social Security and Medicare. Those programs are supposed to have two public trustees to oversee their finances, but because of political gridlock, the positions have remained vacant for 3 years. This is particularly concerning right now, given the precarious state of their finances. Thanks in part to the Peterson Foundation, we at the Bipartisan Policy Center have had the privilege over the last couple of years to help fill that void by working with Chuck Blahouse and Bob Reischauer, the two most recent public trustees, to continue their objective analysis of Social Security and Medicare. Their newly released report is on the front table, and I'd encourage you to grab a copy. Leading them in conversation this afternoon is Mark Goldwine, who is Senior Vice President and Senior Policy Director for the Committee for Responsible Federal Budget, which is one of Funding Our Future's campaign partners, where he is one of the foremost authorities on a wide array of topics related to fiscal policy and the federal budget, particularly for today's purposes, Social Security and Medicare. You can tell how passionate Mark is about these programs because he has taken to including a photo of his one-year-old daughter, Juliana, in PowerPoint presentations where he makes the case for why we need to address them. Mark doesn't have a PowerPoint today, but he's going to lead us in a really interesting conversation with the two most recent public trustees. So with that, Mark.
Well, thank you everyone for being here today, and I'm certainly excited to be here, and especially excited to be on the 9th floor of the Hart Building, which is sort of the Capitol Hill equivalent of the 13th story of somewhere outside of Washington, D.C. I bet most people didn't even know it existed. You heard a little bit about personal retirement security, but what we're going to talk about here a little bit is not just the two largest federal programs for retirement security, but the two largest programs in the entire federal government, which also happen to be, for many folks, their two largest sources of income in retirement. Unfortunately, both of these programs are headed towards insolvency, at which point neither will be able to pay 100% benefits, and instead, under current law, will be cut down to whatever revenue is brought in. Just a little bit of plug for my organization. I am the Senior Vice President for a group called the Committee for Responsible Federal Budget. And if you go to our website, crfb.org, we have an interactive tool that really hits home how much Social Security insolvency could affect you individually. You basically enter your birth year, and it tells you when the trust fund is supposed to run out and how much you stand to lose, assuming average income, average life expectancy. If I plug in 1995, someone who's born in 1995, sort of a middle-aged millennial, Social Security would be depleted by their 39th birthday, and they'd lose about $180,000 of lifetime income in today's dollars. If I plug in my one-year-old daughter, Juliana, as I often do on slide deck, Social Security will be out by the time she turns 17, and she could lose $260,000. I was nice enough not to plug in your birth dates for this tool, but I'm very, very excited to have really two of my heroes and two foremost experts on Social Security Medicare, Chuck Blahouse and Bob Reischauer here. Chuck Blahouse is the Senior Research Strategist at the Mercatus Center, and previously he was the Deputy Director of the NEC National Economic Council for President Bush, and ran the 2001 Bipartisan Commission to Strengthen Social Security. Bob Reischauer is a Distinguished Fellow at the Urban Institute, where he previously served as President. Prior to that, he was the second Director of the Congressional Budget Office, and before that at Brookings. Both Chuck and Bob have written extensively on Social Security and Medicare. Both served most recently as the public trustees of the Social Security and Medicare programs. Both also served on the Bipartisan Policy Center's Retirement Security Commission. And now, I believe you both are part of a former trustees project that has generously been funded by the Peter G. Peterson Foundation. So I'd love at this point to really open up into a discussion of the future and Social Security and Medicare. And Chuck, let's start with you. Can you give us a brief overview of the health of the Social Security program and why it matters for people that are just starting to save for retirement today?
First, I need to make sure my microphone is working. Is it? Oh, wow. Miracle of miracles. Okay. Well, thank you very much. I'm also very pleased to be up here with Mark and Bob, really two extremely illustrious and accomplished experts on these issues. So I think this is going to be a great panel. Unfortunately, unlike the last panel, I think all I will have will be gloom and doom. So I'm glad there was a little bit of optimism injected into the last one. Let me just preface my remarks by saying a little bit about what the trust funds are and why they matter and what the public trustees do in their jobs as public trustees. Social Security has two trust funds. One is the so-called Old Age and Survivors Insurance Trust Fund. That's what we think of basically as the retirement portion of Social Security. And there's also a Disability Insurance Trust Fund. And under law, all of the benefits that Social Security pays must be paid from the resources of these trust funds. So all of you who are currently working are paying payroll taxes into these trust funds. And every year, the annual trustees reports project going forward whether the trust funds will have sufficient resources to be able to meet their full benefit schedules. And for several years, the answer has been no. And each year that imbalance has been getting somewhat worse. Now, there is sometimes a temptation, I think, to dismiss the trust funds as mere accounting devices, and in a certain sense they are mere accounting devices. They're certainly just ways of tracking particular operations within the federal government's larger budget. But I would argue to all of you that they very much matter, and they very much matter for your own retirement planning, because these trust funds are basically what distinguish Social Security and Medicare from other forms of federal benefit programs. They are the things that basically provide some stability and predictability to the benefits that are paid. If you look at most other federal programs, whether we're talking about food stamps or EITC or various so-called welfare programs or what have you, there's almost an annual renegotiation as to who should be eligible for them and what benefits should they get and should there be a means test and all the rest. Social Security and Medicare are much less frequently subject to that. And I would argue that the reason for that is because of this trust fund financing mechanism, because the programs are deemed to be spending revenues that were allocated for the purpose of financing those benefits, and because, at least in the aggregate, participants are considered to have earned or contributed to receive their benefits, that they tend to be less subject to annual political renegotiation, which means that if you're trying to plan your retirement, that's a very important feature. It means you, at least if the programs continue the way they've been structured historically, you would be able to count on a far higher level of predictability in those benefits than if you were counting on food stamps or something like that. And that's very important. Now, I'm not going to try to convince all of you that you should care about this a whole lot now. And the reason I'm not going to try to do that is because eventually you're going to care about it no matter what I say up here. We all go through the same life cycle. In the 20s, as was said earlier, everyone says, oh, well, that's far away, that program's not going to be there for me, et cetera, it doesn't really matter. And there's a heavy discounting of what these programs are going to mean for your life. When you're 60, you don't feel that way anymore. Everyone goes through that process. So it really doesn't matter what someone on a panel says, so I won't try. But what I would try to convince you of is that since you are going to start caring anyway at some point, I would like to convince you should do it earlier rather than later. Because if you don't, and if action to safeguard the finances of these programs doesn't happen soon, you're going to lose a lot of money for reasons that Mark indicated. Now, in answer to Mark's questions about how the financial outlook looks for Social Security, it's not very good. There's an actuarial imbalance of 2.84% of all worker taxable wages going forward over the next 75 years. That might sound small, but it isn't. That's about 21% of all the program's projected revenues. It's about 17% of all the program's projected costs. And what that means is that you have to make already today if you were to have action today, extremely large adjustments in order to bring the program back into a condition where it can pay full scheduled benefits. Historically, lawmakers have not wanted to just cut benefits across the board. They haven't wanted to cut benefits for people already in retirement. So if you ask the question, how big would the cuts have to be if we were going to have only prospective changes in the benefit structure going forward? And the answer there would be about 21%. And that's starting immediately next year without a phase-in. So these are very, very substantial shortfalls. Very important point I would make is that although the finances of the trust funds are often discussed, unfortunately, in a lot of press reporting, in terms of their scheduled depletion dates, which on the disability side is 2032 and on the old age and survivor side is 2034, I would urge you not to pay any attention to the depletion dates because they really don't matter that much. By the time those dates roll around, we are so far past the point of no return, there's no practical likelihood that you would be able to get sufficiently strong legislative action to restore the programs to balance. So the meaningful question is not when do the trust funds run out, but how soon do we have to act if we're going to have even a remote chance of bringing the programs back into balance? And the answer to that is that that window of opportunity is closing already. The shortfall that I just described is already substantially larger. It's about twice as large if you use the same actuarial methodology as the shortfall that was closed in the landmark 1983 reforms. Those 1983 reforms occurred on the brink of disaster. The checks were literally months away from not going out. Those reforms almost didn't happen. There was a lobbying push by AARP to stop them from happening, and both parties had to lock hands and jump off the cliff together and make it occur, and it was a very close-run thing. In order to save the program then, they had to delay COLAs by 6 months. They had to expose benefits to taxation for the first time. They had to bring all federal employees into the system and all their payroll taxes, their new payroll taxes. Obviously, we don't have that option anymore because you're already paying them. They had to raise the retirement age. They had to accelerate a previously scheduled payroll tax increase. And already, if we were to try to act today, we would have to inflict changes upon taxpayers and beneficiaries that are about twice as large today as they were then. If we wait until the point the trust funds are running out, we'll be looking at changes that are about 3 or 4 times as severe as they were then. And another little data point, even if you completely cut off benefits for all those newly eligible in the early 2030s, you still would not be able to bring the system back into actuarial balance. So we're in uncharted waters, and we simply cannot wait that long to fix the system. If we wait too much longer, we're not going to be able to balance the system within its historical financing structure. And then you would have to do something else to finance Social Security. It would have to be financed, perhaps subsidized from the general fund, and the program would have to compete each year for funding with other components of the general fund, and it would be subject to much greater variability and changeability, and its reliability as a retirement income mechanism would be much less. Now, having depressed everyone with that, I want to tell you that we've known all this for a long while, and this year it got even worse. The qualitative long-term picture in Social Security really didn't change much this year. But the short-term picture actually took yet another turn for the worse. There were some adverse developments with respect to payroll tax collections and the size of the payroll tax base. Going forward in the next few years, it was a retrospective data revision that changed the outlook. So we actually are starting this year to draw down the combined Social Security trust funds. That's not a significant event in and of itself. Beneficiaries won't feel that. Taxpayers won't immediately feel that. But the reason it's bad is that it's happening 4 years faster than we thought it was going to happen in last year's report. And an adverse change of that size and rapidity is very unusual. And so that's problematic. So as bad as everything looked last year, it looks that much worse this year. And maybe I should stop before everyone starts heading for the windows over there, and I'll turn it over to Bob.
Well, I think that was a great, extremely depressing overview, and I'm really hoping that Bob can give us some optimism on the question of Medicare's finances and what it means for millennials.
Anybody who knows me realizes that's a false hope. If I can't outdo Chuck in dismal prognostications, I haven't earned my money. Let me just start by saying it's lucky Mark didn't plug in my birth date because I probably wouldn't escape this room alive. Notwithstanding my youthful appearance, I'm on the exit ramp of life here, and as such, I've been a great beneficiary of Social Security and Medicare, and by the time our legislators get around to passing the kinds of legislation that's needed to put these programs back on path, I probably won't be affected very much. Anyway, let me start, because Medicare is a much more complicated program than Social Security, with a mixture of sort of fact, what the program is, and what the prognostication is for the future, and how it will affect those of you who aren't gray-haired in this room. Medicare has two components, the first of which is called hospital insurance, or HI, and it pays for hospitals, some of home health, SNF, hospice. And it operates very much like the Social Security system does, in that benefits can only be paid out of a trust fund. Trust fund is financed by and large from payroll taxes, which all of us pay on earnings, wages, not income. Unlike Social Security, there is no cap on the earnings, which is subject to the tax. It's every penny you earn is subject to the tax. Like Social Security, it also has costs that are exceeding its income, its non-interest income, and as a result, its assets have been, or are at this point, being depleted. And the date at which the trust fund will be empty will be 2026, 8 short years from now, which, given our legislature's proclivity to procrastinate, is really a blink of the eyes. When it is depleted, like Social Security, benefits can only be paid according to how much income is coming into the trust fund, because the trust fund has no legal authority to borrow. If we wanted to close the gap between spending and income over the long run, we would have to increase payroll tax from 2.9% to 3.72%, or reduce spending in 2026 by 17%. Since Medicare payments to providers, HI payments to providers, are well below those paid by private insurance, and are below what providers claim is their average cost of producing these services, and because we haven't been particularly successful about designing policies that can reduce the growth of spending in significant ways, it is highly likely, in my opinion, that most of the solution to this is going to be in the form of higher payroll taxes. And for all of us in the room, that means we have less disposable income from which to devote to retirement savings and other good things. So if you're going to save for retirement, do it now before these added taxes come on board, which, as I said, 8 years from now is not a long time. So that's where we are. Second component of Medicare is something called the Supplemental Medical Insurance Program, SMI, which covers physician and outpatient fees and institutional charges, and some home health and prescription drugs. This is a voluntary program, unlike HI. HI, because you pay payroll taxes your whole life, you are automatically entitled to benefits if you have done this for long enough to be eligible for Social Security benefits. SMI is voluntary, meaning you have to sign up. Virtually everybody does, except people in this room who, as I will explain a little later, often opt to stay in the federal employees' health benefit plan so they don't have to sign up for Part B, because Part B costs a significant amount, and for people with higher incomes, you pay a supplemental premium that makes it not a particularly good deal. Now, SMI, this second part, Part B, has a trust fund, has two trust funds, but there's no danger that these will run out of money. And the reason why is these trust funds aren't supported by payroll tax. They are supported by and large, 72% by general revenue transfers and about 24% by premiums that participants pay or are paid on behalf of low-income participants. And the law says that we transfer this money from the general fund to these trust funds, and we raise premiums sufficiently each year automatically to cover the costs that are expected from these programs. So this is sort of on automatic pilot over here, and you think, well, you know, that's okay. How can that be a problem? Well, it's a problem in two senses. One is that as long as costs are rising in this program, which is over half of the total Medicare bill, faster than GDP or incomes, the premiums that all participants end up having to pay go up at a faster rate than their incomes are. So back to how much you should stash away more than you were asked to stash away, because your premiums here are going to be rising a whole lot faster than whatever you expect your income to be. And they're not inconsequential at this point. Part B premium is $1,600 roughly a year for an individual, twice that for a couple, so you're talking at over $3,000 a year. For Part B, for the drug benefit, it's something in the order of $400 to $500 a year, $1,000 if you're a couple. So, you know, we're talking about, for many people, maybe not at your income level, this is a big chunk of your retirement income, given how modest total retirement incomes are and what the projections are for the future. But rising premiums aren't the whole story that you're going to face, because Medicare isn't a gold-plated program. And you, who are in the federal system particularly, are used to a gold-plated program. It imposes pretty high deductibles, co-insurance, limits on the length of services you can provide, like how many days you can stay in the hospital, how many days you can get a skilled nursing facility benefit. And unlike any other qualified health plan in America today, ACA qualified health plan, there is no catastrophic cap. So you are subject to deductibles and co-insurance up through the roof. And that's the reason why vast majority of people who are in Medicare try and seek some other supplemental insurance to cover them from the costs that Medicare doesn't cover. And those programs are not cheap. The average Medigap policy right now costs $2,200 a year, about $4,400 for the couple. So, you know, I've been adding up here that, you know, the average elderly person is really going to have to shell out a very significant amount of money in retirement, and one that is going up at a very rapid rate, to provide adequate health insurance in the future. Now, if I haven't beaten Chuck at this point, I will add to the bad news, because as SMI costs grow faster than GDP, as they are projected to do, they will absorb an ever-increasing chunk of the nation's income. And to the extent that we continue to fund a rapidly growing program like this, we're going to have to raise regular income taxes to make those general fund transfers, or cut other general fund supported programs, defense, poverty programs, whatever. And so no matter what you care about, you know, in the way of domestic or international spending, it's going to be affected if we don't sort of get our hands around the growth of SMI programs. Now, just a concluding word for you folks who are federal employees and likely to stay there until you retire and not sign up for Part B Medicare. I didn't mention that there's a supplemental income-related premium that can triple the premium costs that I have outlined for you. But many federal workers stay on the federal employee plan because it's a good plan, beats many of the supplemental Medicare programs that are out there, and it absolves you from the income-related supplemental premiums. My guess is that won't last 10 years. So those of you who are pre-gray hair status, if you're counting on, escaping these income-related premium, don't count on it. You're going to get hit with it even as members of the federal employee plan. Bottom line, I see people flashing signs at me that at my age I can't read because my eyesight is so terrible that because of what's happening in Medicare, you're going to have less money as time goes on to devote to retirement. So start doing it now, big time, and you'll be absolved from doing as much as you might have planned later on. And medical costs, because of new technologies, are going to grow much faster, I think, than we have any appreciation for. And Medicare is going to be a lot less generous a program, and that's not going to absolve you from costs, because costs will be more, generosity will be less, the amount you pay for supplemental insurance will be even more. So that's it.
You know, what I appreciate about this, even the good news about that technological growth is also bad news for all of us. I really hope the next panel is a little more positive and cheers people up for the rest of the day. But please do join me in thanking Chuck and Bob for that very helpful discussion, especially in Medicare. Okay.
Thanks very much, Mark, Chuck, and Bob, for a great level set on those critical programs. We're going to come back in the final session to discuss the broader retirement security picture and how these programs fit in. But first, we're really pleased to have Rick Edelman here with us today. Rick is the founder and executive chairman of Edelman Financial Services, and he's the host of the Rick Edelman Radio Show. Rick is a highly acclaimed financial advisor, and he has dedicated most of his career to helping everyday people learn about personal finance. He's a New York Times bestselling author and also has a PBS special on retirement planning. I'd be remiss not to mention that Rick deserves much of the credit for why we are all here today. He's a co-founder of the campaign and continues to be one of its driving forces. It's really exciting to have him here in person to share with you all some thoughts about what he wishes he knew at age 25. Though knowing Rick, he probably did know all of this at age 25, so our title for the session might be a little bit inaccurate. Nonetheless, Rick's going to share some of his key insights, and then we'll leave time for a few questions. Rick?
Good afternoon, everybody. Are you thoroughly demoralized? I am, which is why we're here today. And I'm going to blow through, here's the good news and bad news. Bad news is I have 45 slides. The good news is I've only got 10 minutes to give them to you. So we're gonna jump right into it. And I'm going to speak to you really at your personal level here. I'm going to ignore the fact, for the moment at least, that you're a staffer here on Capitol Hill. I'll talk about that in a second. But you're all facing the same stuff, and that is the need to pay attention to your own personal finances. Too often we spend energy on our careers, making sure everything is there perfect. And when we think about long-term planning, we're usually thinking about Friday. So we need to look at it a little bit different. I want to make sure that you understand all the different reasons that you need to engage in financial planning. Number one is to build cash reserves, to be able to have money, to be able to deal with unexpected expenses as they come up, from cars breaking down to your sister unexpectedly getting married and you got to buy a dress or you got to fly out to the ceremony or what have you. Dealing with debts. Raise your hand if you have any debts. Anybody have student loan debts? Yeah, it's $1.5 trillion now. We owe more nationally to student loans than we do to credit cards. So we've got to deal with getting rid of our debts. We've got to deal with the cost of raising children. The USDA says it costs $250,000 to raise a child from 0 to age 17. $250,000. Guess what happens when they hit age 17? They go to college. We don't even want to talk about that. Oh, yes, we do, because we know the incredible cost of going to college today. The statistics are really rather astonishing. The average cost of college is well over $100,000, and it takes now 6 years to graduate. Less than half of students do, and if they're still saddled with the student loan debt they accumulated. And half of the people in this country are women, and that means their mom and dad of those daughters have to pay for the wedding. The average national cost is $40,000. In New York City, it's $80,000. I keep telling my clients to have sons, not daughters, and only half of them listen to me. We all want to buy homes. We all want to retire in financial security and comfort. We need to take care of our aging parents, and that's part of the Social Security crisis. My mom is 91. And she's getting a hell of a deal from Social Security because she should have been dead 30 years ago. And she keeps going, which is also a bit of a nuisance because I'm still waiting for my inheritance. And so estate planning is a big issue as well. Aretha Franklin, who just passed, the news came out this morning that she died without a will. $80 million estate, and there's total turmoil because the family doesn't know who the heirs are. It's going to be resolved by the courts and lawyers. It's going to take decades, and the family will lose a third of the money to legal fees. So we've got to deal with estate planning issues for ourselves and our families. So that's the overview of what we've got to accomplish in the field of personal financial planning. It isn't something that rich people do. It isn't something that old people do. It is something that everybody needs to tend to over the age of 18, because at the age of 18, I don't know if you noticed this, when you got out of high school, they stamped adult on your forehead, and you now have legal rights and legal responsibilities that you've got to tend to. We tend not to pay attention to a lot of this stuff because of physiology and psychology. Our brains are designed to trick us into making bad financial and investment decisions. There's a whole field of behavioral finance. It won the Nobel Prize last year in economics. It was actually the second time it won the Nobel Prize. And we have, in my firm, an entire 2-hour seminar on the subject. You'll see a PBS special later this fall on the subject of mind over money. And it's the basis for why many people fail financially. The Nobel Prize-winning research was first by Kahneman and Smith in 2002 and Richard Thaler last year in 2017. And it all comes down to this slide. You tell me which of these two horizontal lines is longer. You know the answer to this. You saw it in second grade. We all know that the slides are equal in length. It doesn't matter that you know it. When you look at those, you'd swear that one of them is longer than the other. And it's simply because of the way our brains work. And all of these psychological biases, there are 24 of them, cause us to make really bad financial decisions. And I'm going to show you a couple of little quick steps on how you can take all this science that has been created in the laboratories and apply it to the decision making in your own personal life. And I'm going to limit this conversation to investments. And we've got a big, huge conversation in the field of personal finance, as I've just mentioned, but we're going to talk about the very tangible element of the incredible importance for you to save some of your income. We're not going to get into a whole lot of conversation of how much you should be saving, but I'm going to show you where you should be saving it. And there's 4 simple steps. What I'm about to show you is how we manage money for our clients. We're now one of the largest investment management firms in the nation. We have $22 billion in assets under management for 36,000 families all across the country. And what I'm going to show you is how we manage money for all of our clients. You don't have to do this with us. That's not my point. What I'm about to show you, you can do anywhere. You can do it on your own. You can do it with any financial advisor of your choice. You can apply this within the thrift savings plan, which we're going to talk about as well here today. 4 simple steps. Number 1 is to establish diversification. We know that investing is risky. The problem is there's no such thing as a safe investment. Every investment has one type of risk or another. And so the way we minimize risk is 12 eggs in 12 baskets. Don't highly concentrate your money. Don't put all of your money into one thing. And let me illustrate for you the importance of this. We took a look at the 16 major asset classes and market sectors over the past 10 years. And back in 2008, 10 years ago, we ranked them from the very best at the top to the very worst at the bottom. And here's how they performed. Each color box is a different asset class. You know, stocks, bonds, government securities, real estate, gold, foreign currencies, commodities, timber, oil and gas, on and on and on. Guess how these asset classes performed over the 10-year period? Here's how they did. Do you see the pattern? If you do, you need a psychologist, like I was talking about. There's obviously no pattern here. It's incredibly random, and that's the point. Nobody knows what's going to happen next in the financial markets. And anybody who claims to know is either lying or not an expert. We'll just leave it at that. Let me put it to you another way. Go back over the last 10 years to those 16 asset classes. If you invested in all of them equally for the whole 10 years, you would have earned about 7% per year. That's a pretty good return. But if you missed the three that made the most money over the 10 years, the three each year, your return would not have been 7.2, it would have been only 3.3. More than half of the returns of the last 10 years were provided by the top three assets. And that's the point. If you can't pick what the top three are going to be, don't bother trying. We don't know, and we don't try to pick. We invest in all of them. It's like, instead of buying a ticket on a racehorse, we buy on every racehorse. And then we own the track besides. We don't care who wins the race because we're going to be equally invested across the board, and it solves the problem. Now, I'm not suggesting you just have an equal portfolio of stocks and bonds. That's a little too simplistic. This is more illustrative of the kind of diversification that you can obtain in a diversified portfolio. It's got, in the world of stocks, large cap, mid cap, small cap, growth and value, US and foreign. In bonds, it's government and corporate. It's short term, intermediate and long term, high quality and high yield. It's got US versus foreign. There's real estate, natural resources like oil and gas, precious metals, minerals. You've got exponential technologies. That black dot in the middle is cash. Cash is an asset class. This might not be an asset allocation that makes sense for you. Maybe your asset allocation will look like this, or this, or this. In other words, the kind of portfolio you create has to be based on your situation. How much money do you have? How much money are you saving? How long is it going to be remaining invested? How soon do you need to generate income? What's your attitude about risk? How much volatility are you willing to tolerate? We have some nifty tools at our website. There's a lot of nifty tools available on the web to help you figure out what an asset allocation ought to look like, and the key is to build one. That's step number one. Step number two is to do whatever it is you're going to do for a really long time. You tell me, what are the two things the stock market does? What do prices do? There are only two things they do. What are they? They go up and they go down, right? Do we all agree with that? Well, it's wrong. That's not how the stock market works. If the only thing the stock market ever did was go up and down, nobody would ever invest in the stock market. That'd be like playing with a yo-yo. It's not how it works. Instead, the way it works is think of playing with a yo-yo while you're climbing a hill. The highs are at ever higher points, and the lows are at ever lower points. In other words, this is the performance of the stock market. This chart shows you the performance of the S&P since 1949. And as you can see, when the market is rising, it rises a huge amount for a really long time. But when it falls, it only falls a little bit for a short period. In other words, it goes up 7, down 2, up 5, down 1, up 4, down 3. And it's because of that that people are discovering that it's possible to earn a lot of money in the stock market, but you've got to be invested for a really long time to enjoy that benefit. And so the key is to build that diversified portfolio and leave it there for a really long time, which takes us to point number 3, which is to engage rebalancing. This is perhaps the most important investment management advice that I can give you, and it's the one that the vast majority of Americans never do. Let's say that we began, to illustrate the point, with a portfolio of 4 assets, equal split: stocks, bonds, government securities, and cash. Which do you think is likely to make the most money over a period of time of these 4? Which of these 4 asset classes? Stocks, right, reasonable guess. Historically, stocks have always made more money than everything else. Past performance is no guarantee of future results. Any assertion of the contrary is a federal offense. But we have to assume something, and so we'll assume that stocks are going to do well in the future. Look what happens if that's true. In the future, because stocks grow faster than everything else, they eventually become a bigger piece of the pie than everything else. And all of a sudden, you're not diversified. You are now highly concentrated. And if that were you, and you're 65 in 2007, you got a problem. Because the market's about to crash 50% over 18 months, and you're not going to retire like you thought. And so what we've got to do is rebalance the portfolio to bring it back to the original diversification. How do we do that? What do we have to do to have our portfolio go from this back to that? We have to sell some of the stock, right? Because there's too much of it. And we have to buy some of the bonds and some of the cash, right? Because there's not enough of it. In other words, we have to sell the asset that made the most money to buy the asset that made the least. We have to sell the winner and buy the loser. Who's willing to do that? It's counterintuitive, isn't it? Can you imagine going home from work and saying to your spouse when you get home, hey, honey, you know that stock we bought? We made a fortune? I just sold it. And that dog, where we lost a ton, I loaded up. Can you imagine a stockbroker trying to pitch to you a 1-star fund instead of a 5-star fund? And that's the point. Psychologically, we love to invest when prices are high. And we love to sell when prices are low. In 2007, when the market was at an all-time high, investors were throwing money at the market. And by 2009, when the market hit the low of 6,700 on the Dow, people were selling like crazy. They bought high, they sold low, and then they complained that the market's rigged. This is investor psychology. This is behavioral finance and why we've got to overcome it. And that is exactly what rebalancing does for you. It prevents you from buying more of the very asset you should be selling and getting you to buy the assets that you ought to be buying as opposed to the one that's the opposite. And our final fourth step is to keep costs low, because the more you spend in investing, the less you get to retain. The average annual cost of mutual funds in this country is 0.62% per year. That is the price that mutual fund investors are paying on average in this country. Contrast that to exchange-traded funds. They're 2/3 cheaper. Why on earth is anybody buying antiquated retail mutual funds when you can obtain the same diversification, often with the same managers, buying the same portfolios, and saving 2/3 of the price? And oh, by the way, don't assume you have to do this on your own. In our firm, our clients are paying 0.25. The reason I say this is not to brag about our firm. I don't think we're terribly unusual for many financial advisors in the country. The point is, don't assume that financial advisors are going to throw you into incredibly risky or unusually expensive investments. Not always the case at all. So you can summarize this very simply. Diversify, focus long-term, rebalance, and keep your costs low. One final thing I want to mention, and then we'll do some Q&A, and that's your thrift savings plan. We asked the question earlier, how many of you were participating in the plan, and most of the hands didn't go up. You're supposed to understand you should have raised your hand even if it was a lie, just so you'd look good to everybody else in the room. So we're going to assume you are participating in your thrift savings plan, and if you're not, you need to. You need to contribute to the maximum pre-tax you can, at the very least 5% of your pay. For as Mary Beth described, you need to, and Jamie did as well, you need to make sure you get the full match. There is nowhere else you can double your money without any risk. And that's what you get in the thrift savings plan. You also have the benefit that the thrift savings plan is the cheapest retirement plan in the country. Two benefits I can't provide my clients unless they're working for the federal government. So here's the real key, is to join the plan, throw as much money into it as you can, a minimum of 5% of your pay. And now the second question becomes, where should you invest the money? You have how many choices in the thrift plan? Anybody know? There are 5, plus the L funds. We don't count them because they're just combinations of the other 5, right? So you have 5 choices. Which of those 5 should you be using? Here's the answer. CSI 40-40-20. 40% of your money into C, 40% into S, 20% into I. In other words, all of it into stocks. None of it into G, none of it into F, because those are bonds or fixed income accounts. Why am I telling you to ignore? I just said a moment ago, diversify. I told you to do that, right? And now I'm saying don't diversify, don't buy the bonds, don't buy the fixed, put it all into stocks. Why am I telling you to do that? Contradictory to what I said a minute ago. There are two reasons. The first reason is you have an incredibly long period of time in your thrift plan. You're not going to touch the money, looking at the ages here, you're not as old as me, you're not going to touch the money for 20, 30, 40 years, and as we've seen, time means stocks win. So that's the first reason. Second reason, there are two ways to diversify. One is to buy a lot of different kinds of assets, 12 eggs in 12 baskets. That's one way to diversify. This is the one most people think of, is 12 eggs, 12 baskets. But there's another way to diversify. It's called diversifying not by asset, but by diversifying by time. In other words, nobody makes a lump sum contribution into the thrift plan. Instead, how do you put money into the plan? With every paycheck, right? How often do you get paid? Once a month, right? So picture this. Picture that you're getting a paycheck, and out of that paycheck, you put $100 into the thrift plan. And let's pretend that the fund you're buying is $10 a share. Next month, you get another paycheck, and you get another $100 that you put into the plan. And you're taking the $100 and you're putting it into the very same fund that you did last month. Only this time, there's been a market crash, and the fund is only worth $5. You tell me, when the fund was $10 a share, how many shares did you buy? This is a math quiz. How many shares? 10 shares. When the fund was $5 a share, how many shares did you buy? 20 shares. So you tell me, what's the average price of the fund? You know, you bought some at $10, you bought some at $5, so what's the average price? $7.50? Follow me on this. What's 10 plus 20? It's another math question. What's 10 plus 20? 30. What's 100 plus 100? You've invested $200. You own a total of 30 shares. Divide that out. And what's the answer? What's 200 divided by 30? 660, 666. Wait a minute. You said 750 was the average price. But I'm showing you that the average cost is 667. Do you understand what I'm talking about? It's called dollar cost averaging. And the simple way the mathematics work is that dollar cost averaging acknowledges a very important principle to investment management. Do you know what that principle is? It's the following statement. When it comes to investing money, we are all idiots. When is the time you should buy? Low, right? We should buy when prices are low. When the stock was $10 a share, dollar cost averaging said, you idiot, you're not supposed to be buying. The price is high at $10, so I'm only going to let you buy 10. But when it's $5 a share, the price is low, you idiot, and I want you to buy a lot, so I'm going to get you 20. You end up with a cost-efficient methodology of accumulating the shares, and the only thing you've got to do to make it work is to put in the $100 with every paycheck and let the math do it all by itself. You're right, the average price is $750, but you're also right that the average cost is $667. Now think about that. If the average cost is always lower than the average price, can you imagine how much money you're going to make over the course of your career? And that is why I want you to invest in the most volatile investment you can find. It wouldn't do you any good to dollar cost average into a bank account where the price is always $1. You need to invest where there are wild swings in value so that you can take advantage of buying lots of shares at low prices and relatively few shares at higher prices. And where do you find massive volatility and unpredictability? The stock market. And that's why I want you to put your money into CSI 40-40-20 in the stock market. Do that for 30 years, and you're going to be glad you attended today. There's an awful lot of other information and content that is available to you. I've written 9 books myself. We have our first children's book coming out in November for 3 to 5-year-olds. It's never too early to start learning about money. And we've got a huge amount of information through the Bipartisan Center's partnership with Edelman Financial and all of our other partner organizations at fundingourfuture.us that we invite you to take advantage of. I'm just really thrilled that you're here. And before we go to Q&A, I just want to mention one thing. In fact, I'm going to wait. I'm going to put you in suspense. We'll do that in my final going away message. First, we're going to jump right into Q&A. So we've got microphones, I think, there and there. So if anybody has a question on any subject in the field of personal finances, happy to take them. There's a question right here. Wait for the mic so we can get that on tape.
Hi. Housing is a major way that people accumulate wealth in this country. Like, what's the best way to know if you're over or under investing in housing?
So you're right, real estate, I'm not going to call it housing, real estate is a major asset class. And there are lots of ways to make money, and real estate is clearly one of them. I'm going to break out real estate between personal residence and investment real estate. Your residence is not an investment. Your residence is a place to live. You buy it because it's close to schools, work, and shopping, and far from relatives, and it meets your needs and everything you need to accomplish. So the fact that your home rises in value over time is serendipity. Don't count on it, don't expect it, it's likely to happen, but leave it at that. Rental real estate, investment real estate is a whole nother beast, and clearly an element of a diversified portfolio that you should engage in. The problem with real estate is that it takes a lot of money. It is highly concentrated because most folks don't have enough money to buy lots of pieces of property the way you can buy lots of mutual funds. Nobody ever calls me on the phone at 3 a.m. because something went wrong with their mutual fund. So it's a nuisance, it's a pain to be a real estate owner, to be a landlord. So you need to factor all that in. We do recommend that clients have 3 to 5% of assets in real estate. You can argue 10. Real estate investors will have the entire portfolios in real estate. I'm personally not a fan of that from a diversification liquidity perspective, but real estate is a perfectly fine asset class. Two things to keep in mind. The returns on real estate over the last 100 years are nowhere near as high as the returns on stocks. So do not think you're going to get richer in real estate than in stocks. The reason it might appear you do is the second reason, and that's leverage. Most real estate investors don't pay cash for the real estate. They borrow the money, they get mortgages on it. And it's the fact that they invested $100 grand to buy $1 million property that creates the illusion of a big return. You can do the same thing with stocks. You can margin your stock account and have the same benefit. So yes, real estate belongs in the portfolio. Don't think you're going to do as well in it as you will in stocks on an equal risk-to-risk parity. But yes, you should do that. And yes, you should consider home ownership only if you're going to keep the home for 7 to 10 years or more, because the incredible cost of home ownership relative to renting. So don't take the attitude, I'm throwing my money away on rent. No, you're not. Any more than you're throwing your money away on a car. I mean, we all know the cars fall in value, but we buy them anyway. They have a lifestyle service, and so does where you live. So home ownership and rental properties are two different things. Yes? Oh, we need to turn the mic on. I can. Well, I'll repeat it if that doesn't work.
Okay. Well, either way. Oh, here we go. So I was going to ask originally, as a federal employee who makes like 40K, and in D.C. where your living expenses are insane, should we be worrying about like investment apps or Roth IRAs or TIA CREF or all these different things, or am I understanding correctly that you're saying just not just use it, but the TSP is like the best way to go until we're making something that we can live off of?
So is
that more or less what you're saying?
Yes, I understand your question. Great. It was really well said. I'm going to give you the 4-step process for creating wealth in America. Step number 1 is to join the thrift savings plan to the maximum you can pre-tax. That's step number 1. Step number 2, pay off debts. Now, a lot of people find that funny that I inverted it that way, because a lot of people think you're supposed to pay off your debts first. You got 18% to Visa, get rid of that debt before you start saving. Why do I say save first? Because, you ready for this? You're going to have debt your entire life. If you wait to pay off your debt before you start saving, you will never save. So, am I freaking you out, Mary Beth? Are you with me on that? It's really important you do this, because a lot of folks think the opposite. Oh, you got to get rid of the debts. Well, of course you do, but not to the point where you're delaying your savings. So join the plan at work here, the thrift plan, and then when you get that underway, focus on getting rid of those debts. particularly credit card debts, personal debts. If you've got car loans, mortgage loans, or student loans, just make the regular monthly payment. Don't make extra payments. Don't try to accelerate the payoff. Just make the regular payment program and leave it at that. Step number 3, build cash reserves. You need to have 12 to 24 months worth of spending in cash. 12 to 24 months. That's not 12 to 24 months of income. I mean of your true spending needs. In other words, if you lost your job tomorrow, doesn't really happen on Capitol Hill, does it? But if you've got some kind of major financial crisis, maybe a family member has a crisis, you need to help them, or who knows what, you've got a year or two to tide yourself over before you had to tap into other resources. So a year to 2 of cash reserves. And then finally, step number 4, saving elsewhere, which is the question you raised. Saving in an IRA on the outside, saving in a brokerage account or an investment account to build wealth toward buying a home, toward raising children, to saving for college for those children, to other needs that are going on in life, and so on and so forth, including all important Friday night. So that's the 4-step process.
And we have time for one more question. Here you go.
Hi. Rick Ted Knudsen, contributor to Forbes. We've known each other for years. We've disagreed before. We're going to disagree right now. That when you talk about investments, I mean, overall, what you're really talking about for retirement is standard of living. For standard of living, there are 2 things involved: income and outgo. You're a renter. You have a lot more outgo than if you own your own home. So
No, I don't agree with that. I don't necessarily agree with that, and I'll tell you why. Homeowners will do things in their homes that renters never would. Homeowners will decorate, they will paint, they will wallpaper, they will build draperies, they'll install AV systems, they'll build fences, they'll engage in massive landscaping. They spend huge amounts of money in maintenance and repairs and property taxes that renters never have to incur. Homeowners have to decide which of the 2 of you is going to stay home from work because the plumber's coming. The renter calls the landlord and says it's your problem and leaves. So you're also dealing with the real estate commission cost of the property. And people say, well, it didn't cost me anything to buy the house because the seller paid for it. Well, one day you're going to be the seller, and here's one of the biggest crimes of all. You know what the commission is when you're dealing with real estate? What's the commission when you typically pay a realtor? 6%. Of what? Isn't that ridiculous? Nobody in any other business charges you a percentage of the sale price. They always charge you a percentage of the purchase price. Think about it when you buy a stock or a mutual fund or a car. You pay the commission on the value of it at the time of purchase. But they don't do that in real estate. You buy a house for 500 grand and sell it later for $1 million. You're paying 6% of the $1 million, not of the 500,000. Really, it's a 12% commission. Not a 6% commission. Renters don't have to incur any of that. Renters can also get up and leave whenever they feel like it. Homeowners don't have that luxury. So this is why I can argue, and in fact there are a few million people in New York City who agree with me, that homeownership is foolish. And you have people, Ed Koch, the former mayor of New York, was famous for never having owned a home. And a lot of New Yorkers feel that same way, people in urban areas. So don't be so quick to buy a home, especially if your life is unstable. Because if you don't know where you're going to be in 5 years, you don't know if you're going to have a spouse, you're going to have kids, you don't know where your job's going to be, buying a home today can set you up for a financial problem that as renting you don't have to worry about. One final comment, because Shay's going to throw me off. I said I'd get it to you. This whole conversation today, although I really wanted to talk with you a lot about your own personal finances and the need for you to become successful individually, you have a unique role in American society. And I'm thrilled that you're here today because I want to emphasize this with you. You are a key member of the congressional staff here on Capitol Hill. You have the eyes and ears of your member of Congress and the Senate. And as a result of this, we need to recognize the incredible challenge we are facing as a country with Social Security and Medicare. I want to make sure you really fully understand the bluntness of the situation. Current law says, and I'm emphasizing this because I believe many members of Congress don't realize this because they weren't in office in 1983 when the law was last changed. The current law says that starting in 2034, some people say it's 2032, current Social Security retirement benefits will be cut 23% across the board. If Congress takes no action, the current law mandates a 23% cut in benefits for all retirees equally. This will create an economic crisis for millions of retirees of unprecedented proportion, with more than half of today's retirees receiving more than half of their incomes from Social Security, and that average check being about $1,200 a month. A 23% cut down to about $900 a month will cause millions of people to lose their homes. They'll be unable to buy medicine. And just imagine the economic impact on this country, and imagine what Congress will have to do about it with massive tax increases to come up with the cash to prevent that from happening, creating a massive problem for everyone younger still in the workforce, meaning you, in just 14 years. We need to get this fixed. We need to get this addressed. Just like we did in 1983, proving it can be done, we need to do it again. And we need to do it really, really fast, because the longer we wait, the more difficult it becomes to fix. And that's the messaging that you're hearing today. So I implore you to please address personal finances for yourself and your family, and please use your unique role here on Capitol Hill to discuss this with your member of Congress so that we can begin to figure out how to solve the issue. The solutions are readily available. There's been a huge amount of brain power applied to this. Now all we need is Congress to take action to protect the nation from what is inevitably otherwise coming. Thank you so much for your time here today. I really, really appreciate it very much. Thank you so much. Let me just go to this for you, Shai. Where's the top button here?
Thanks, Rick. That was really a great overview. So now that we've gotten some key advice for what young professionals should be thinking about when it comes to their retirement and financial planning, we're going to turn back to the policy, because planning for retirement in the United States as a whole remains incredibly difficult and complex, as Rick was illustrating, in terms of what's out there. Many Americans continue to fall short. So now we're going to look at the bigger picture and talk about some of the ways that policy could improve retirement security. Luckily, we have the perfect person to lead that discussion. Ida Rademacher is a vice president at the Aspen Institute and executive director of the Aspen Financial Security Program. Aspen's program has done so much terrific work under her leadership, looking holistically at retirement and financial security. Ida is an expert in economic inclusion research and policy, and she has a reputation, which I can verify, as a collaborative and creative thinker. We're so pleased to have her and her team as partners in this campaign, and I'm going to turn it over to Ida to lead the next session.
This on, because it's only the third time I've had to hear it. Can you guys hear me? Is that all right? All right, hi. I'm glad we're following Rick. I'm glad we're actually coming at the end of this for the retirement policy conversation. I want to invite my colleagues up here. And I want to start with just two thank yous. I want to thank the Bipartisan Policy Center for both the earlier commission work and the vision to create a Funding Our Future campaign, and to bringing in such a diverse set of organizations and individuals. I think that the way that somebody I heard recently described this issue as, it's a chronic illness, you know? So it's like, it never feels like the right time to have to act. And collectively, we're grappling with that as a generation with climate change. We're grappling with it with retirement and longevity issues. They are things that are hard to wrap our head around. So it takes people like Rick making this personal. And it also takes us thinking hard about the experiences of not just our friends and families, but asking one step beyond, because I do feel like there is a way that the fact that half of the population in this country's experience of their financial life is quite different than the one for folks in our room. And I don't think we have to look too far, but we have to make that part of the work that we do, is to really try to connect this huge critical policy challenge to the personal at every given moment to try to prioritize it. So Funding Our Future campaign, as we'll hear, has an amazing set of different organizations with different ideas in some ways about what the solutions are, but we all agree on the urgency of solving a problem that is hard to feel urgent about sometimes until you look at those alarming graphs. So thank you for that. And with that, I just want to introduce the panel, and I'm thrilled everybody can be here today. So I think we'll just go along the way. Andrew, are you at the end? So Andy Schreiner is the Vice President of Public Policy at Fidelity Investments, and it's great to see you here. I'm going to do short bios just because we have a short amount of time and a lot of great folks and insights on the table. But Andy leads a lot of the work and the team at Fidelity that develops the firm's positions on key policy issues related to retirement and tax, financial services, a whole host of other issues, and also really is the face of the liaisons with groups like this, and we appreciate the input that Fidelity has and the voice that you have on these issues. And Jim, right here beside me here, is president of the American Benefits Council, and it's great to be on having you on the panel, Jim. You've been in that role since 1992, leading what is a very growing and very powerful group of employer voices and really helping to look at the policy positions and needs of those employers around a whole host of benefits that deliver health and financial well-being to the workforce. Another critical pieces we'll see as we try to unpack this retirement issue. Monique, good to see you. Monique Morrissey is an economist at the Economic Policy Institute, where I read everything you put out within the week, usually, or month, or whenever David writes me talking points. Where's David? He's in the room. But the Economic Policy Institute has had a lot of work with Monique leading much of it in terms of policy analysis on a whole range of the issues that we're talking about here, not just, again, as personal finance, but also as a policy issue. Social Security, pensions, employee benefits, household savings, tax expenditures, all the issues of financial markets and Federal Reserves. It's great to have you on the panel. Thanks, Monique. And Kathleen Romig is the Senior Policy Analyst at the Center for Budget and Policy Priorities, which I'm sure no matter what kind of support people in the room are doing for your congressman, CBPP is always part of who you consult to kind of get insight on those things. And oftentimes it's Kathleen who has been doing the analysis on Social Security, on supplemental security income, on a lot of other budget issues. And that's really what we hope to do today is kind of talk about this range of issues that connect to retirement security. We certainly have talked a little bit about the growing costs of some of those key pillars, Medicaid and Social Security, and we'll revisit those in this context, but also alongside of that other critical dimension, which is the 401k system, the employer-based savings system in this country. So we'll try to get a flavor of it, and I also want to leave 5 to 10 minutes for these questions. So let me just jump into it, and thanks for your patience getting through bios. Monique, let's start with you. I think that in some ways you've tried to paint the biggest picture in terms of your understanding of, from a household's perspective, what are the challenges they're facing when it comes to achieving a secure retirement. So would you want to kind of start by unpacking that a little bit for us?
Yeah, sure.
Great.
Sorry, make sure I'm, does this thing light up? Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, first of all, I thank you very much for having me here. I'm really pleased to be here. And I agree that we have a diversity of views. There is one thing we all seem to agree on, which is that there is a problem, that taken together, Social Security, private savings, and employer provided, we don't have enough. And believe it or not, as an economist, I can tell you that not even everyone agrees on that, but everyone here agrees on that. And there are some economists that think it's perfectly rational to not have very much when you retire because you might be dead, and so it's better to consume now. This is, believe it or not, a perfectly legitimate, strange and not perspective, but it does exist out there among economists, and I don't think any of us share that view, so we can rule that out. I think another thing we all probably agree on is that yes, the TSP is great, and you should all max that out. It's the lowest cost, and it's the gold standard for 401ks, and every private savings account plan that we talk about later should approach it in terms of keeping costs down and allowing diversification. So what is the biggest challenge that workers face? A lot of people would say, well, people aren't saving enough. It's a little bit subtle, but I would say something different, which is the biggest challenge we face is the loss of secure retirement income. And by that I mean that the average Gen Xer, which is me, and the average millennial, which is a lot of you guys, are going to see Social Security cuts that are down by about 22% compared to what you would have had before the 1983 cuts that were talked about earlier came into effect. So everybody is already getting a Social Security benefit that's about 22% lower on average than you would have gotten before. And then in addition to that, this happened at a time, and people wouldn't have predicted, that we also saw basically the slow disappearance, or actually quite rapid disappearance of secure pensions in the private sector. So unless you work for a government employer, which you do, but the private sector workers are really not, most of them have a 401k plan instead of a pension. So we were cutting Social Security at a time when it wasn't really anticipated that people were also going to lose their pensions. And 401ks sort of were an accident. This is also something that people are maybe not aware of, but they were originally designed as deferred compensation for bank employees. So they really aren't designed to be a very good vehicle for retirement, but that's what most people have at this point. The Center for Retirement Research at Boston College has estimated that the typical millennial or Gen Xer has saved about as much as previous generations have at the same stage in their career. So when I say that the problem isn't that people aren't saving enough, it's that people are saving what they used to. So people are no more slacker now than they used to be. They're saving about the same. But what they're trying to make up for is the loss of these Social Security benefits and these pensions. And to put this in perspective, pension income remains, 35 years after 401ks became the dominant plan in the private sector, traditional pension income is still the majority of non-Social Security retirement income that retirees are getting. Thanks. So 401ks really have not filled the gap. They essentially replaced them one for one in terms of coverage, but they haven't replaced them one for one in terms of the average person having enough to retire on. So
biggest challenges,
trying to speed this up. Anyhow, I came a little bit late, but I left a few charts. One of the things that EPI does is every 3 years, we put out a retirement income chart book, and we show how most people don't have much saved in these accounts at all. So the typical millennial has about $1,000. If that's you, you're not alone. Typical Gen Xer, maybe $5,000, $6,000. And even the typical baby boomer approaching retirement, we're just talking about $20,000, nothing much. So if that is you, you shouldn't worry about that. We can talk about solutions later, but I just wanted to emphasize that even though the problem is often laid at the feet of workers, it's really not that people today are saving less than they used to. It's that they're saving the same amount, but they need more savings than they did before, and we need to fix that.
Okay, thanks. So there is still a savings gap, for sure, and the consequences of that are even bigger. So those are two of the giant challenges of that, and I think from a household perspective, become realer and realer as people start to face those costs. Jim, you start this from the other side, at least in terms of the fact that the U.S. does have a workplace-based savings system for retirement. You see this from the point of view of the employer, and in the retirement system, don't be confused, employers are called plan sponsors. It took me a little while to figure that out when I sort of was like, who's a plan sponsor? That's Walmart. No, I don't know. But from a plan sponsor's perspective, from the employer's perspective, where do you see their challenges in this system kind of presenting themselves? What do you think the biggest hurdles are there?
So is this on? Nope. Help me out here. Yeah.
Okay, good.
All right, so I'm determined to be the good news messenger here. And not because the challenges are not great, but because I actually think the answers to some of those challenges are more within our grasp than might otherwise appear. And let me start first, actually, if I may, just on a really, really personal level, and then kind of get into the policy things too. You've heard many people already say this morning how important it is, please start as early as you can. An illustrative example of that, take two people, Jessica and Josh. Jessica starts putting away $5,000 at age 25 for 10 years. She stops at age 35 and contributes nothing more after age 35. Not recommending that, just using it as the illustration. So she's put away $50,000. Josh starts at age 35 and puts away $5,000 for 30 years until age 65. He has put aside 3 times as much as Jessica, $150,000. At age 65, given a 7% annual growth, Jessica will have $602,000. Josh will only have $541,000. So thanks to the magic of compound interest and this value of starting young, it makes a huge amount of difference. Now, on the policy front, macro, micro, The macro challenge or solution, I think, is that we really don't have a national retirement income policy in this country. And so consequently, and you all see it, dealing with, congressional legislation that's put in and hearings and whatever, policymakers rightly decry the decline of the traditional defined benefit pension plan, but then sometimes embark upon policies, which I'd be happy to talk about, that actually sort of hinder the ability for an employer to sponsor those defined benefit plans. Likewise, we decry the lack of adequate savings, but there have been proposals to limit how much you can put in on a tax preferred basis. We saw some of that in the very sort of pre-stages of the tax reform discussion last year, when there was this concept of Rothification that would limit how much money people could be putting into their defined contribution 401k plans and such on a pre-tax basis. So where we need to really start, I think, is, and this is a part that you all can play a big role in, is encouraging our elected officials to come up with a national retirement income policy. Many of you had already arrived when I arrived, so I put some stuff out there on the table, but I'll just sort of ask you to maybe pick one up on the way out. We put together sort of a list of some guiding principles, which I'm not going to go through, and other groups will have other guiding principles, but the point is, these are the kinds of building blocks that could be of a national retirement income policy that could address it. Now you'll say, well, things are so partisan here, how is it possible to embark upon this? And that's sort of where I'll get into the micro piece. The other piece that I left out on the table is a 3-page chart that lists a whole series of different bipartisan bills introduced having to do with improving the employer-sponsored retirement system. As partisan as things may be in other policy arenas in which you all are operating, and happy to report in the retirement area, there's a huge amount of bipartisan support. This whole Funding Our Future campaign is coordinated by the Bipartisan Policy Center. It is within reach. Some specific things that you can keep your eyes on to. There's something called the Retirement Enhancement Savings Act, which actually there's a potential for it to still be considered yet this year. There is also, and these are some component parts of it, things called multiple employer plans, MEPs, that would allow disparate small businesses to sort of band together and form plans and achieve some of the economies of scale. And maybe one last one that I think we can all appreciate, and that also has some bipartisan support, and that is support for electronic disclosure. Some of the rules that govern plans are still very, very antiquated in the sense that they require individual plan sponsors to give you and give the plan participants information on paper, even though we all have grown accustomed to getting information electronically. A huge amount of money and time and effort could be saved. A lot of trees could be saved, and still it would enable those people who don't have access to some sort of a device or computer to request their plan information on paper. These are just practical things. They're maybe not all earth-shattering things, but they would all be building blocks in improving the system.
Thanks, and we'll certainly come back around to this, but I actually want to stay with the employer-based retirement savings plan for a minute. So Kathleen, I'm going to skip you for a minute and go to Andy, because I feel like it hangs together. It should hang together a little bit more in our minds. Jim, thank you for unpacking some of the broader, both possibilities, but also, some of the issues that employers are facing when it comes to providing retirement savings through the workplace. Andy, I want to actually ask you to come in, broadly with anything you want to add about the challenges that you're seeing, but specifically, when you do look outside of government, when you look at the private sector, about half of employers offer a retirement savings plan, and about half don't, and we heard about that earlier today. So it's a lot harder, I think, for folks to kind of think about this savings as an opportunity when it's not something that's provided at the workplace. I wonder if you might talk a little bit about, and the MEPS is part of what would describe that with a policy thing, but for the smaller businesses, I think please feel free to speak broadly to the employer-based savings plan and where you think the challenges are, but specifically there, where do you think there's both challenges and opportunities?
Yep. Is this on?
Yep.
Thank you. And first, I just want to thank Shai and BPC. I do think that they have been doing a lot of great work, and we've been participating with them over a number of years. And so thank you guys for the opportunity here. Jim, a lot of the comments that you just made on e-delivery, first of all, I'll note I did not leave any materials out there because we do like to e-deliver. So if folks have questions, I'm happy to email them over to you afterwards. We do have some on fidelity.com as well. This idea that has been raised today about the importance of the thrift savings plan, right? So you all are very lucky in that you have a retirement savings plan available to you at work. For those of us who are in the corporate sector as well at big companies like Fidelity, we have great benefit plans available to us. But, as you're pointing out, for most small businesses, they don't have the ability to offer those types of plans, right? So 50% of workers don't have a retirement plan available to them. And if I take a step kind of backwards down the number line here, I've been at Fidelity for 12 years. One of the first projects I worked on was a glossy brochure, again, we don't make those anymore, which was touting the benefits of the Pension Protection Act. And that had a lot to do with auto features and auto-enrolling people. Since that time, there's been a lot of effort by policymakers to try to solve this so-called coverage gap. And that's taken a lot of different forms over the years. We've had auto IRAs, which are still out there in many ways, but haven't been advanced because of employer mandate fatigue after the Affordable Care Act passed in 2010. We have the now defunct MyRA. So many of you in the room might not be aware of it, although all of us were very much involved in its development over the years. And then we've seen states, and I know we're going to talk a little bit about that in a minute. States now are trying to step into the void and create state-run plans. I think one of the challenges that policymakers face is that sometimes we have this idea that, say, policymakers, thus us in the retirement policy, we need to build a better mousetrap. That's not always the case. So in the case of open MEPs, which is something that we see as a really good opportunity for small businesses, it's taking an existing vehicle, looking at its flaws, and then thinking, how can we change it to make it a truly viable solution for small businesses? So I'll touch very briefly on that. So these idea of open multiple employer plans, right? So economies of scale they can't reach if you only have 5 to 10 employees. It allows employers to pool together. The problem is that the existing structure today has some restrictions around needing to be in the same industry. There's liability concerns, et cetera. As Jim pointed out, there is a lot of bipartisan support for changes here. So I'm also very optimistic that in this type of environment where a lot can't get done, clearly the retirement savings issues are bipartisan. They should be bipartisan. And I think there's an opportunity this fall or in the next Congress to move on some of this. Finally, I'll just note, we at Fidelity are thinking about the future of the workforce. So some talk about gig workers and contingent workforce. An open MEP could serve as a platform for workers in the future and really try to provide a consistent platform of benefits to folks as they're jumping from job to job, gig to gig. And that's something that we're starting to look more and more into.
And I know that's, to put a plug in, I know we're doing some research. We have to release something later this year looking at what are the tech platforms and other ways to help kind of, just what are the other options that are out there in terms of the access issues for retirement savings. If we don't get it all the way there for employees as the changing nature of work continues to happen. So we may get back into the gig pieces of this. So let's just review for a second, and then we'll go into a next round of questions. When you think about the 3 pillars in the Funding Our Future campaign, the big one around, the first one is coverage access. We want to make sure that everybody in the U.S. has access to a facilitated savings plan, ideally through the workplace, but through mediating platforms that can serve that function, if not. Because people maybe don't have enough, and the best part of getting accumulated consistent savings is by having some kind of a facilitated savings plan there. So there are coverage issues that can be, there's a set of policy issues around open MEPs and what can the private sector be incented to do in terms of expanding the access that employers have and workers have, but also reducing the risk for both employers and workers to do that savings system. That's probably a bad summary, but that's the first piece is a really critical one and one that Congress has absolute ability to help us solve as a society. This is the place where it would need to happen. It is starting to happen at the state level because the issue is becoming so critical there. That some states are taking it, to their own advantage. And, Monique, I don't know if you want to say something quickly there before we move into kind of adequacy and longevity issues. If anybody has anything else to say about the state plans, but just so you know that the federal automatic enrollment and auto IRA ideas that haven't really gained purchase as a federal law have been taken up by a growing number of states to solve this access option. And so that is an additional innovation. I think that there's both policy innovation and market innovation happening, not necessarily here in DC, but certainly in the private sector and certainly in some of the states.
Yeah, no, that's true. Right now with gridlock and polarization at the federal level, the states and even some cities are getting into the game. And it's hard to generalize about these plans. There are different kinds, but probably the best known are the secure choice plans, which are auto IRAs. So technically they're not really employer plans, they're IRAs, but the employer has a role in facilitating access. And all of these plans, I should step back and say, are designed to improve access, especially for private sector workers who work for small businesses and for lower income workers, because these are the people that typically don't have an employer-sponsored plan, don't have access to an employer-sponsored plan. So the primary function of these plans is facilitating access and also sort of dealing with behavioral issues that Rick Edelman raised earlier, in terms of making it easier and like you opt out instead of opting in, so you're more likely to actually participate. You might escalate the contribution rate, things like that. But there are limitations to these plans also. They're state plans, so they can't address issues around tax, like, for example, tax incentives. They are also, a lot of them are not ERISA plans by design, because that's to enable, you can't have a requirement that employers participate and make it an ERISA plan, but that means employers can't contribute to these plans either. And then a lot of the plans are also the sort of the devil's in the details about whether or not they keep costs down or they have appropriate diversified investments and they limit risk and things like that. So especially for low-income workers who might need access to these
And what I'd
plans.
say to this is, I think in terms of the mainline message here, the recognition that this problem needs to be solved means that new kinds of people are stepping up to say, what are ideas here, and what is a floor that's better than no floor?
Yeah.
And so there's some additional piece of the mix. So it's something to keep in mind of. But ideally, it kicked back to the federal policy level at some point. I can't imagine. It's kind of like having gas standards in all 50 states, right?
Yeah, and I'll keep it short, but I do want to piggyback off of that because Kathleen's in the room. Kathleen Kennedy Townsend is now at EPI, and she's done a lot of work over the years. She is on the Maryland. She's on the board of the Maryland task force that's creating the plan in Maryland, but she's going to be working to take some of the lessons that we learned from these experiments at the state level and maybe a few years down the road take it at the federal level. So anyhow, so definitely it's sort of an incubator for, watch the states. And just, sorry?
You want us to weigh in? You said.
I want to weigh in, but I also want to put the other table, so you can, it's kind of like carte blanche across the table here, because the other thing, I'm just mindful of our time, is that the other two pillars really in the funding our future part are, if we're going to solve this challenge, if there's going to be retirement policy in a comprehensive way, we're looking at coverage, but we're also looking at a lot of the issues that were brought up earlier around expenses are spiking for people as they age. People are living longer. Social Security and Medicaid is potentially less, not potentially, almost guaranteed to be less of what they have as a nest egg to support itself. So this whole idea of lifetime income and how does the solving of longevity happen with lifetime income as well. Social Security has been always that annuity in some ways for people, that is the kind of pillar one of a retirement system. But I think that within plans, that's another area as well. So I'd really want Kathleen to speak, and then Jim. And feel free to bring in the kind of what you see about other actors coming into this space as well. I think it's great. But Kathleen, would you start? Thanks for being patient.
Sure, of course. Is this on? Yeah, okay, thank you. This is the point of the afternoon where I normally have everyone do a show of hands about, is Social Security going to be here for you? But you have been very lucky to have people across sectors, across parties, all telling you that Social Security, while it must look different for you, by the time that you retire, will be here for you. So are we all clear on this? Yes? Truth is truth, facts are facts? Okay, cool. But one thing that we all agreed on as part of the Funding Our Future effort is that Social Security should be strengthened, that this is an urgent priority for our country. And while we might disagree on how we think it should be strengthened or why we think it should be strengthened, this is something that unites all of us. And so I'm on Team Rick here. I think that the most urgent reason that Social Security must be strengthened is that we simply cannot ask working families to take a hit of 25% when they retire. And those working families will be your families, because that's when these trust fund reserves will become depleted. That would be a disaster. Average benefits are $17,000 a year. Think about that, 25% less than that. That's just not acceptable, and it would mean, as Rick pointed out, people not being able to afford medical bills, people not being able to keep their homes, and things like that. So it's urgent that we fix this problem. But I'm going to depart a bit from what Chuck was telling you, because I think that while the shortfall is real, it's manageable. For many, many years, Social Security has cost about 5% of GDP. As the baby boom retires, and as the lower birth rates that we've experienced for several decades have kind of play out in Social Security's finances, the Social Security program is expected to cost 6% of GDP for many, many, many years. Stable, this is not exponential growth, this is a stable level of GDP. So from 5 to 6%. So we have a problem that amounts to 1% of GDP. This is a manageable problem. We can fix it. I personally do not think we should fix it on the back of working American families who are going to need those benefits now and in the future. I think that we should fix it by kicking in a little bit more. That's
great.
Yeah.
And I think, when you think about what are the income streams that you have in retirement, this is another big area where you've been doing a lot of work, and I think we probably should bring in the issue about what are the private savings opportunities, what does the retirement system need to have in it for that lifetime income idea, so people have a certain sense of not just how do we accumulate money in a retirement system, but how do we get smart about people's choices in that decumulation phase. Do you want to say something
Sure,
about
be happy to.
that?
Yeah, so actually, and some of this is the topic of some pretty active conversations going on right now in Congress relative to something that you might hear the term LIDA, or Lifetime Income Disclosure Act. The idea that there should be more information given to individuals in terms of, what does their current savings, let's say in their 401k, translate into in the form of a stream of income later on, hopefully with the thought in mind that it'll then encourage people to see, well, my needs are actually greater than, than it appears today. Because we don't have time, the legislation itself needs some other changes in terms of giving greater flexibility to a variety of employers in terms of how they would go about doing it. But the concept is one of sort of more information to help people along. Another idea that's been tossed out in the past has been the idea of importing sort of features of traditional what are called defined benefit pension plans into, the defined contribution 401k type plans by, for example, maybe providing some better tax treatment for investments in a 401k, which pays out a guaranteed level of income as a traditional pension does, either in the form of, let's say, an annuity that a life insurance company would sell, or some comparable type of financial instrument that an investment company might sell. So there are things like that it doesn't always have to be sort of an either or, traditional pension or 401k. There could be perhaps a blend of it. Just real quickly, because I want to give my other panelists an opportunity to chime in. You asked if I wanted to sort of say anything about some of these other actors. The activity with the states is an example, I think, of a really well-intentioned approach to address people that you mentioned correctly, like really aimed especially at those who are employed by smaller employers with their own sponsor plan. That nonetheless has real-world implications, particularly for companies like my members that operate, in all 50 states. And you can imagine sort of the challenge of trying to comply, to say nothing of the individual municipalities like New York City. So the idea here is making sure that for those employers that already sponsor a plan, that they don't have to sort of jump through all sorts of hoops in terms of getting at sort of the intended audience, if you will, of people who are not fortunate enough to have an employer-sponsored plan.
Thank you. And I also, Andy, I want to invite you to kind of weigh in on, just the kind of innovations you're seeing, the kind that you're thinking about as a company, and that your peers are thinking about as well. in terms of any of the either accumulation phase opportunities here, any of the lifetime income issues.
Yep, and
For
so.
this particular audience's,
Yeah,
concern.
and this is a good way to end on a high note. I mean, I do think that there is a lot of opportunity for policymakers. We in the financial services industry are obviously constantly looking at our own customers and savers and trying to better understand what those needs are. We've done some extensive research over the past couple of years about the contingent workforce, and I think a lot of people think of them as Uber drivers or Airbnb. It's not. Most of them are professionals, doctors, lawyers, others, big employers as well, as Jim knows, are moving more and more towards wanting to have a more contingent workforce because there are benefits of having employees work in the private sector, move to the public sector. I used to work in the public sector for years, and I think there's benefits of having employees have kind of both different experiences. The challenges they face there, though, and a lot of reasons why contingent workers won't jump from job to job, income volatility is number one, and we're working on a pilot now to help people think about tax withholding and try to provide a product in that respect. The second is benefits, and so again, Ida, actually with Aspen working with you guys and trying to think about the future of work and what policies might be possible to help people have more portable benefits, whether it's healthcare or retirement or student loans or what have you. And then the third is really, empathetic, which is a sense of community. They lose a sense of community when you go and you're working on your own. And so how might we collectively help provide some of that to the workers and the needs that they face? It's important work because it's moving fast in that direction.
I feel like it's, and I want to, if there's any one or two questions, please raise your hands, and we'd be happy to close this out with a question or two. Anybody have and let's just go ahead and take both in the middle, and we'll hear them, and we'll see what we can do with them as we close this out. Thank you.
Yes, thanks. Rob Colorina, AIAC Investment. Maybe a question for Jim and whoever else wants to chime in a little bit on technology. Have you studied to what extent, if you are going more online, and I understand the argument for green and saving environment, what have you, but the potential risk for cyber and other type of issues that come up there in terms of false applications and theft of funds, that type of thing. I'd be curious to that.
Theft and fraud and technology in the savings realm. And you, sir?
Is there an economic rationale for subsidizing private saving instead of using that money to shore up Social Security?
Just small questions at the end of the day that we'll go to. Go ahead. And we'll have to keep them short and provocative in terms of answers, just like your questions, just to keep on time.
Well, for every dollar of tax expenditure for employer-sponsored plans, $7.15 of benefits are actually paid from employer-sponsored plans. So that's a hugely valuable investment, and to the extent that we don't have a robust employer-sponsored system, the pressure on Social Security and other public programs will be even that much greater. On the technology question, I would just say that that is a real concern, as it is in every element of our life and our society these days. A lot of the effort, however, on electronic disclosure is really about meeting and employers and service providers legal obligations to provide information that isn't, in that respect, containing confidential information. It might be more generic information about plans. I mean, there is sometimes that there's something that's obviously very specific to that individual, but most of it really is just required annual notices and things of that nature, which wouldn't pose a risk.
I would also just add very quickly, I mean, ID theft is much more likely to happen through paper than it would be through electronic forms. Companies like Fidelity and others in the industry are partnering very closely with governments. There's a huge new sweeping data privacy law that just happened post some of the Facebook Equifax issues. I know I'm getting into a very different policy area that I cover, so I'm happy to follow up on that. But I would say that, I echo Jim's comments. A move to e-delivery should not have concerns from a data privacy perspective.
And I want to thank the panel. Did you want to say something?
Would you mind?
Just super quick, because we are so late, and I'm.
Okay. Oh, sorry. But yes, just on the final question, you've gotten some great advice today for how you can prepare yourselves individually for retirement, and that's wonderful. But you've also heard about some major, major gaps. 50% of people not having a savings plan at work, people trying to live on $40,000 in Washington, D.C., and also save for their retirements. People haven't even mentioned all of the things that are going to befall you in your lives, like illnesses, job losses, death of a spouse, all of these other things. So, doing this on your own, and also just all of the complications, all of the ignorance, frankly, that many of you came in with. This is really complicated to do on your own, and it's not going to work out all the time. But you know what does work for the vast majority of retirees in this country? Social Security. And so what we need to do is keep our promises for the system that is working for retirees now and make sure that we spend any additional dollar on retirement savings on shoring up that program before we start to invest in other things.
And as I said before, I think there's, again, the wonder of the coalition, Shai, and let me invite you up to close this out, is that there's a lot of robust debate around all these issues that has to happen. There has to be trust and relationships to make that happen. It has to be a priority that doesn't slip off of the top 1, 2, or 3 that you all can help convince your legislators to work on. So thank you for that, and thank you very much to the panel.
Thanks so much, Ida, and the whole panel. And if we could give all the participants from today just a big round of applause. I think these sessions were terrific. And I know they each put a lot of preparation into making today's event a success. Most of all, thanks to each of you for taking some time out of your day to join us. We hope you found the sessions interesting and informative, and have a great rest of the afternoon. Thank you.
Super fast.
Oh, wow, how nice.
You're so sweet.
What's that?
Thank you. Yeah, nice to meet you, too.
Nice to meet you in person. I know we've talked, yeah.
She's been great, yeah. Yeah, David and I should come back by.
Good. Yeah.